We're not crazy, the system is. Tune in to Madness Radio, voices and visions from outside mental health. Wednesdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Pacifica affiliate WXOJLP-FM 103.3 Valley Free Radio. Produced by Freedom Center and the Icarus Project, streaming live, podcasting, and archived at madnessradio.net. Thanks for tuning in to Madness Radio. This is your host, Will Hall. And in the U.S., we just celebrated Thanksgiving, which is kind of a day of family and food, and it's a big holiday. But for a lot of us, for Native people, and I'm actually mixed race. My mom is American Indian Choctaw. And so for a lot of us, it's not really a day so much of celebration. It's also a day of mourning and remembrance, and really a day of great concern for how U.S. society, as well as many societies around the world, haven't really come to terms with the European colonialism in North America and the Western Hemisphere, and the way in which colonialism has decimated people's lives, destroyed cultures, destroyed native society, and still is causing problems. We're still living with that legacy today. And so today is kind of a bit of a Thanksgiving special here on Madness Radio. We have a very special guest from Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. Stella Montour is Ojibway First Nations, and she is an advocate for mental health. She's done quite a bit of public speaking and public education in Canada, involved with a group called Photo Voice that we're going to be hearing about. She also worked with a young offenders facility in the criminal justice system in Canada. She's also a grandmother. Welcome to Madness Radio, Stella Montour.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you on the show. Now, how did you get involved with the mental health system to begin with? I know you have a long story, and I'm really interested in hearing about the work that you're doing today. But where did it kind of all begin for you in terms of being involved with the mental health system?
Well, in 1991, I was working in a young offenders facility, and a lot of the youth that I was working with started disclosing a lot of different kinds of abuse to me, and I guess for me that was a turning point, and I was starting to feel really depressed, and just knew that I was in denial about some things, and that I was a victim myself, and I guess it all collided and came together in 1991, and I was hospitalized. In 1991, I had a breakdown. I didn't know what was happening to me, and I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and that was the beginning for me.
So when you say you had a breakdown, what was happening to you at the time? What do you mean when you say you had a breakdown?
Well, I was sent away for my job. I was sent away on a really intensive healing program through my workplace, and I ended up going to something called Flying on Your Own, and it was a program for Native communities, and it dealt with all kinds of issues, and I think it just opened everything up, and I ended up in that 5-day intensive program, slipping away from reality, hearing things, animals talking to me, and people from my family line, my grandpa, they'd passed on, and I was seeing them, and I was just grieving big time, and I was delusional, and I was talking crazy, and my family didn't understand what was happening to me. So I was taken to a lot of different places for healing before I actually got to the hospital.
What kinds of places were you taken to? Did they try kind of traditional approaches first, or?
Yeah, some of them were, and all that stuff was kind of new to my family. The healing lodge and medicine men, those were new concepts to my family, and we went there, and I was healed by a medicine man, and they were taking the bad spirits away from whatever my disease was. And then another native friend of mine who was a Christian took me to people who were praying on me and telling me to denounce everything that I had, everything they could think of. And I hadn't even, some of the things they were making me denounce I hadn't done. So those kinds of things, like, they were really, really difficult on me after I came around and I was well again, because I got the message that I was very unclean. There was something terribly wrong with me, and to this day I still have difficulty with that because it was so archaic, the thinking.
So it sounds like you tried both traditional healers that maybe your family, even though your family wasn't so involved in native healing traditions, and so you tried that, and then you also tried Christianity, and the Christian healers were trying to get you to denounce things. What do you mean, like confess that you were sinning or had done bad things, and even though they didn't even know what you had done?
Yeah, they were telling me to denounce the use of a Ouija board, which I've never had anything to do with. Dancing, like anything that's immoral to them. But I had, like, some of the things that I was saying is like I was telling them I never did that in my life. So, it was really scary.
It sounds like it was a really kind of fundamentalist Christian group of some kind. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it was. I think they were Pentecostal people.
So they were really, your family was kind of really thinking that there was like spirit possession or demons, or that you needed some kind of exorcism at this point. Is that why they kind of took you to a Pentecostal Christian?
I don't think my family knew what to do with anything. People in higher places, like priests and chiefs, the chief of the reserve and of my reserve was saying that these, like, people were directing them in how to get help for me.
What kinds of healing did the native healers try that also wasn't helpful? How did that go?
In all the time, in the years past, I always had the conflict. Whenever I got sick, I was fighting between my nativeness and Christianity. Both of those are good. They have good in them, and the Christianity seemed to be winning. Whenever I was in a manic episode, it seemed to be winning because it's a dominant society, and it seems to be if there's so much non-native people in the world, then they must be right. But what about being reminded all the time that, Stella, you are native? Even if I'm in a church, like, she's our native representative, she's going to tell her testimony today. Like, they're always centered out for being native, so that I always knew that, I belong where I belong. And looking around all over the place, I ended up finding, like, the recovery process, and the recovery is within me and accepting who I am, which is, ultimate healing is knowing who you are and what you represent and accepting that, and there's always going to be trouble for you. And it's just the way that you take it on that given day. Picking your battles, what are they going to be?
So you went to native healers, and they weren't helpful at that point, and you went to these Pentecostal healers, and then eventually you ended up in the hospital, right? How was that for you? What kind of experience was the hospital for you?
Well, the hospital was traumatic. It was probably if what happened in there hadn't happened, then it might have been helpful. But what happened in the hospital was that, like, I was in there for 3 months, and I wasn't allowed out on the grounds. I could see the birds, I could see the grass, but I couldn't touch the earth. And that is like, for a native person to be locked up and not being able to touch the earth is extreme, I think, pain. It's inflicting pain on a person because we're so close to that. And what happened in there is unspeakable and unimaginable, but it does happen. I was sexually assaulted by another patient. I told my husband at the time that what had happened, and he called the police, and he also called talked to the hospital administrator and said that he wanted, this taken care of because he put me in a hospital, not hurt anyone and not to hurt myself. But here I was, this thing happened, and when I told the staff, they just started laughing at me, and from there on in, I think I got sicker because nobody did anything. The police didn't do anything, and the hospital administrator just moved that patient to another ward. So that was my initial experience, and from that point on, I was never right again, because what I was trying to deal with, what had happened to me in there, and you'd think that people were supposed to be helping people with mental health problems would, listen and do something about it, because that's their job. They shouldn't be, killing a person's soul and spirit the way that they did me.
That's really awful. And this was a hospital in Canada. And what other kinds of things happened? Were you were there for about 3 months? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Were you were given a diagnosis of schizophrenia? Did they do any kind of treatment? Were you given medication, or was there therapy?
Oh,
or
yeah.
What other
Yeah,
kinds?
I was always on Haldol, which would black me out. Like I would black out from Haldol. Like one time, I had blacked out for a month. I don't remember from the time I went in there to the time I came out, and as a result of that, if ever I have to go into the hospital, which I haven't had to do in 5 years, it's on my record never to use Haldol, because that's the kind of effect it has on me. It happened a number of times. So that 3 months was, I can't hardly remember anything except that happening and trying to make us think and getting out of there. I talked to the patient advocate at the hospital, and I talked to different people, people that are in a position to help. I talked to them and asked them if there's anything that could be done in terms of getting some kind of help and being able to talk about it with somebody. And nobody listened. And that's the kind of thing that happens, the racism that I encountered during that time, and they pretty much shoved it under the carpet. And that was something that I lived with for up until about 3 or 4 years ago, and that happened in 1991. So I didn't get help for that until I spoke to the woman who made the documentary, which was Laura Sky from Toronto, and she was the one who actually listened and validated my story. And that was the first time anybody ever believed me. And so since then I've been talking, and it's made me stronger, because I'm not living a lie anymore.
Stella, when you were in the hospital and you said you were experiencing racism, what kinds of experiences happened?
Well, just the fact that none of this was taken seriously, that was my initial thing. But during the on and off, like I was hospitalized, I think 15 times after that, either for severe depression or mania. And some of those frontline workers, the workers, would make fun of my my self-expression in terms of, being a Native person. Um, I was ridiculed for that, and then, trying to work through the system in terms of help after I found out there were people out there like me, like other consumer survivors who had experience in terms of dealing with things. Because the first thing I had to deal with is when I got out of the hospital, I didn't have any medication or anything, so I didn't know what the heck was going on. I sat for a year at home, had no idea what had happened to me. All I did was sit there and, drink coffee and realize it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I hadn't done anything. And I didn't realize that was in severe depression, and nobody told me anything. So once I found that out, I think in 1992, I went into a manic episode, and I went to the library and got stacks and stacks of books, like read everything that I could on schizophrenia, and I didn't think that I was schizophrenic. I didn't think that I was manic either. Today, I do think that I have bipolar illness, because I've tried going off medication, and either one of the two comes back. So when I say racism, it's like when I tried to get into the consumer survivor organizations that are here, I experienced racism from the members until, they assumed that I was stupid and I didn't know very much. They just assumed things like that, and then I started doing the things that I just started being myself, doing the things that I can do. And I graduated from college, 2-year community work degree or whatever, like a diploma. So, I do have skills, but I've never been able to use them in any job. So the volunteer stuff that I do is right up my alley, because it's working, working in the community. And my community now is Thunder Bay, and it's a mix. Like Thunder Bay is like there's a lot of Native people, but there's a more white population.
Stella, how did you get out of the hospital? How were you able to get out of being locked up for 3 months?
I quit. I quit staying up all night, and I started eating. And the when in the beginning, I guess I was hearing voices and seeing things. So that's when that's how I got out. And my husband and my home reserve came to my defense. Like, they were there all the time, and I guess the hospital had never seen anything like it. Like, a person have so much support, because usually people are sent from northern communities, and like nobody makes a big deal of it. But I guess because I was living a successful life, it really made a difference, and I had a real supportive family and community at the time, and they got involved. And my husband was the same for the longest time, but eventually, because of my illness, I think we grew apart because of the trust issue and just the continuing bouts of illness. It just seemed to put a lot of pressure on our marriage, and there wasn't very much things in terms of support. Like, we're just starting to get a family program going here, and I think that if we had, public education, and there wasn't so much stigma on families, that maybe my family would still be together, because in the process I lost my job, my reputation, my my home. We had a really nice home, and we lost, well, his car, my car. I lost everything in the process, and I had to start all over again with nothing but a mattress and a couple garbage bags. So it's like that was it. It was a real hard place to come from and build myself and my family up again.
Let's talk about just in general the situation with the Native communities in Canada. How does the mental health system really impact Native mental health, and what do you think is the role that colonialism is playing in the kinds of experiences and struggles that that people are going through in terms of mental health today?
Well, I think that certainly residential schools really did a number on our people.
For people who don't know what residential schools are, can you just tell us a little bit about that history?
They used to come, and in my mother's generation, I'm 50, 52 actually, I think. My mother was, she's, I'm first generation, not going without, um, haven't been in residential school. My mother was in residential school, and she came back to the reserve and had no idea what her culture was about, and she didn't have bonds with her mom and her dad. And for me, like I used to, my mom used to tell me things that seemed absolutely ridiculous. Like, we started going to school when I was in grade one. She used to tell us to run off the road and hide behind a tree, or hide. And I used to think, well, that's ridiculous. And she never told us exactly why that was, like, we had to do that. As a little kid, I used to think, I wonder, what would happen if we stayed on the road. And it wasn't until years later that my sister and I were talking about that, and we said, figured it out, that my mother was saying this to us because she was afraid that the Indian agent would come and take us away and put us in residential school. Now, residential school tries to assimilate um, the native children, and it pretty much does that. If not, just screws your whole life up, because you never fit in anywhere, and they take away your religion and put in, at that time, Roman Catholic beliefs. And then, like, I grew up on a trap line. I remember my uncle singing and stuff before he went out on a hunt, and my aunts and my mom, that they would be the ones to stay home and make decisions while my dad and my uncle were off doing the hunting and that. So they had roles, like they had roles to play, both of them, and they weren't uneven. But when you put colonialism on, and it becomes the man becomes the boss of everything, the religion says that. So women become forgotten about, and so it turns everything upside down, and you have these people that are robots, but when they get to the age of trying to get a job, they couldn't get one. It was like you either were a woodcutter or a seasonal guide up here, anyways. And then they start taking the chopping away, and there's nothing left So you've got all these people with, no boundaries, not having healthy boundaries, and who have nothing to look forward to, and end up, with drinking, and the problems of that day. Now, today, we have youth who are in the same boat, but with a lot more escapes. So you have a high rate of suicide, and the social and economic situations aren't very good up here because the wood industry is no longer. So it's very complicated, and you have a whole generations and generations of people who are really, really screwed up. I don't know if I explained that well enough, but did my best.
How do you think the mental health system could do a better job of helping people?
Well, one of the things I think that they could do is allow people to be themselves. Um, if you're a Native woman, like just let people be themselves and not try to make them into something else. Understand the history, because the history is like I think that's the biggest thing, is the history of where people have to be taught in schools, like public schools, and understand that there's a generations of people with post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's the biggest thing, is that all of us are healing from something. Like you could just if you did history of the United States, you'd have Wounded Knee in northwestern Ontario. You'd have Bended Elbow. Those are fights for land and things for trying to improve our quality of life. So I think that's a real those are real big issues. If people understood, they quit, calling us down, and the racism would be less. And even, I think, I'm not even sure what you call, I don't know, I think that's one of the biggest things. And then the other thing is start hiring more mental health workers. It would make it easier in terms of, especially people coming from the north, they still speak Ojibway fluently. It would help to have translators to explain like what's going to be happening, and so that people will stay to get help rather than go back home quickly without getting the help that they need. Hiring more police, native police, encouraging young people to go into those professions, and I guess allowing people to choose what kind of treatment they want. Do they want to go with their way, like the traditional Ojibway way, Anishinaabe way, or mix it with the traditional psychiatric treatment? Having choices and being able to make those choices yourself, and not being, I guess, I don't know what the word is. Like if you don't follow the government's way, that your check will be taken away if you're on a disability. Those kinds of things I think would help, and then believing that this is temporary, that I am going to recover, and it's an ongoing process, especially when it's nations of people that are affected by colonialism. And education, I guess public education is the most important thing.
So I know that you said that in your own experience you did go to native traditional healers and that it wasn't helpful. But do you think that it can be helpful that people who are having mental health crisis or maybe in those kind of manic states or states that would be called manic that you went through would be able to get help from some of the traditional healing ways?
Yes, I think they could, like that people could, because um, after after everything was said and done, and I was left alone. I didn't have my husband with me. Um, I didn't have anybody. Everybody went away after a while. Like after I was diagnosed, I did well for a while. Then I'd have a relapse. There wasn't anybody after a while, so I made decisions myself, and one of them was to go my own way. It's like I don't belong to any particular group or any native group. In the beginning, I did go back to what they call the sacred circle, which is like you go there and you tell your troubles, and we pray and smudge and just tell, leave everything there. It was really, really helpful for me, and I still go to those every once in a while. But I make my own choices, and I think that's really important in anybody's recovery. I'm not just talking about Native people here. Like whatever your choice is and what you want to do, it's got to be your choice, not anybody else's. So that's something that I way back in '92 I sat on an advisory committee for the hospital that I was in, and one of the things that I voiced, was that they were at that time just starting to have people, Native people in there, and they were called elders, and they would go and see the patients in the hospital, and because it was something new, anyone who came through that door, people were putting them into native people that came through that door. They were putting them into a box. Oh, they need to go. If they need the spiritual help, we'll send him. Well, that's not necessarily the case. It's like no native person is always ready to receive that part, because it has been beat out of us. So people find that when they're ready. At the time that I went there, I think I had been wandering the road looking for my right spirituality, and I think at the time I was a practicing Jehovah's Witness, but they could never get me to quit smoking. So that was like I wasn't fully, but I had asked help from their elders to pray over me, and they would have nothing to do with me. They told my husband that I was possessed and that they were afraid. So I never did get help from them, but that's the thing, is that I went all over the place. I went to a Native Evangelical church, and I also went to AA. I went to Codependence Anonymous. I went to Dual Recovery Anonymous, and tried to find something that would fit my. So I use all of those services, but only when I want to, and I feel that I need them. But I believe in my own way, and that's I'm a Native person, so I pray and smudge as I need it, and I go to powwows when I have a ride there, because Thunder Bay is a very spread out community. So you either have to have a car to get to some places, because most of the powwows are held in different areas that are hard to get to.
What kinds of other things do you do for your wellness these days in terms of recovery, and what kinds of messages might you have for other people who are having mental health problems and really kind of need some guidance?
Well, humor. Laugh a lot. That's part of my working with the Sanity Project, which is the name of our theater group. The name of the show that we recently did, where one of your friends met me. We did the recovery monologues, and we write we meet every Friday. We write. We start out with the line like, today I feel, and then you just write for 5 minutes, and then from that, all the people who wrote, if there's 4 or 5 in the group, we get like a monologue from different parts. Not one is. They're all written by all of us. The monologue itself. So it's teamwork, and there's we're all the people that are involved who do the show are at different stages of recovery. Somebody might be just finding out about it, and we had one monologue that was on suicide, the death and the effects of it, and this woman acted it out. And mine was the funny one. And at the time, we wrote this monologue. I was working with the mental health and criminal justice, and I had a funny story to tell. So a big part of the monologue that I do is my story. That's how we get things done. That's how we work together to get the monologues going. So that, I guess, journaling helps me. I write a lot of poetry. Doing things like photo voice is really helpful because it gets me out there, and there's usually a panel and people ask us questions, and we talk about our experiences and why we took the picture, and get their feedback. And some people have never even heard of bipolar or schizophrenia, and it's new to them, so it's really encouraging.
What do you think are some of the biggest obstacles today to having good mental health and having healthy communities among the Native peoples in Canada today?
I think a lot of what's happening is people are going back to their roots, and being allowed to do that freely, even being supported. I think that's probably that's probably really healthy, because I feel really good about having, gotten there and being confident, feeling self-confident about who I am, and no longer, pretending, that I'm somebody else. I don't know how to explain that. I don't know if you get my drift.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. The history of having your culture taken away from you and then being silenced and not listened to in the hospital, and then going through the process of trying to recover that and getting your voice back. Is that kind of what it is?
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's also living where I do. There's a if I have a strong sense of myself. I know who I am. Then I can't lie and say that part of what my problem is racism, because it's actually, I think it's around the world with Aboriginal people. They're coming to that awareness that is a real big problem. Like, some people even have said to me that racism is a mental health problem, because if people continually put you down day to day, it becomes like from day one when you're going to school. Like in my day, when I was going to school, I remember the things that learning about Native people, and I didn't even know it was Native people at that time. I was just a kid, and they were teaching about savages or the savage. And it was I didn't. It was confusing because the further on I got in school, I realized like that there's something wrong with me. And then you get to high school, you go through grade school, and people call you names, like squaw and stuff like that. It does nothing for your self-confidence or your self-esteem. What it does is continually tear you down all your life, unless you have, a stable family, a stable, somebody stable in your life that tells you that, or teaches you how to fight that, how to deal with that. Because after a while, it's, you could call it a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it's not. It's society's putting that on you. Like that's what I mean. It's like when you, at times when I was sent, or I'd get manic, it was because of the frustration of having to deal with people who didn't like me. Not even, they didn't even know me. They're just, you know, the shopkeeper, the woman at the grocery store, who just shove you out of the way, and that kind of thing is like, it doesn't happen all that much to me anymore, because I learned to be assertive instead of being quiet, because I was a very quiet person at one time. I never said boo if somebody was, putting me down. I would just allow it to happen. So I think, like part of what's happening is we are waking up. Like we've been in a long sleep and we're starting to wake up, and it's making the whole world uncomfortable. And I think that's great, because maybe we'll be treated like humans one day. I'm getting a little but I think that's a part of it. It's like the mental health problem that becomes a mental health problem if you grow up in it, because you're always feeling like you got to do better than 10 times better than the average person.
So you've been really very strong in your recovery and really been able to turn your life around. But what about, do you have friends or relatives or people who you really saw get crushed by this system of colonialism and racism, and who didn't make it out through recovery and out through the other side like you did?
Very much. I've seen a lot of people die from suicide. Um, they were very young. Like I had a brother who committed suicide. He hung himself when he was 22, and he was so young. And it was, I'm sure now, knowing what I know about mental health, that he probably was bipolar, because he would go for days without sleeping and stuff like that. Like he was very artistic. He'd build, you know, fantastic pieces of furniture out of wood, like pieces of leftover wood. So like there. I've seen a lot of my family and relatives go through, like with mental health and addictions, because they were depressed as a result of not being able to get a job, and that looming, that nothingness in front of you. But I think that, it's that all of that is starting to change.
Do you think in terms of illnesses, because I know you're talking about illnesses, do you think that it's possible that it's trauma, that people have been through violence, and that the colonialism is really at the root of it. And then sometimes,
Exactly.
and then sometimes it gets called an illness as a way of kind of blaming the person and saying, "Oh, this is something that's wrong with you," whereas in fact it's really something that happened to people, and it's really about trauma and the oppression that went on.
Yep, I think you got it right on the nose. You got what I'm saying. Yeah.
And the other thing, do you see a lot of, because I know that you mentioned being medicated, over medicated, and just being really blacking out on the Haldol. And do you think that there's a lot of addiction that happens to the medication, that people get put on the meds and then they become dependent on them, and that really what needs to happen is that there need to be, like you said, more options, more alternatives, that native ways and traditional healing arts need to be brought in as an alternative to medication. Do you think that there ought to be more of that and more choices for people about that?
Yes, I do. I definitely do. I really think so. I think there's, if people are going to be on a disability, I really think that the disability should also be, changed, like the amount of money a person gets, because there's not an awful lot a person can do, and when a person gets diagnosed with any of the mental illnesses, like, yeah, that it's happened, it's almost a given that they'll become dependent on it, unless they have, they do research and figure out whether, some people don't even know that some of the things that they're put on are addictive.
Right, like caffeine or alcohol or some of the drugs that people take. Yeah, because
Valium,
Valium, yeah, there's not.
oxys, like that's a real problem. Is a real problem, beginning to be a real problem in the northern communities here in Thunder Bay. So I mean in northwestern Ontario. So it's, yeah, definitely, like the medication that's being given out like candy is having an effect on everyone from in northern communities.
Stella, what gives you hope? We don't have a lot of time left in our interview here, but I wanted to just ask you, what is it that gives you hope? What is it that you really think is some of the most exciting opportunities for change and for a revitalization and a real recovery of the entire Native culture and community there?
I think that having our own, finally, I think it's been in process for about 5 years now. It's been in place. We have our own mental health center, and it deals with the person holistically. Um, I think that they're putting a lot more money into Native mental health services, and that's something we've never had before, and it's turning towards the direction of self-determination, which Canadian people have been fighting for a long time.
So
And
that's a new mental health center that's controlled by the Native community, and it's on the reserve there. Is that right?
yeah, yeah, there's more money going into our own personal things. Uh,
And
but
they offer holistic alternatives and spirituality,
yeah,
native
yeah,
spirituality as well. That's fantastic. That's great news. But that was really a result of a lot of years of fighting to get that. Is that right?
that's right. Yeah, and it's still going on. I don't think it's ever going to end because there's all kinds of land claims that go along with, um, getting economically stable, with which then hopefully the mental health of people will get better.
So we are just about out of time, but can you leave us with a website or a way that people can find out more information?
At the moment, the only thing I could think of is the Canadian Mental Health Association, and I think on there you could find a clip of the photo voice. You could hear you could hear and read the photo voice. It's called Network Magazine.
Okay, I'll make sure and put a link to that on the website. Stella Montour, thank you very much for joining us today on Madness Radio.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to an interview with Stella Montour, who is an Ojibway Native activist, advocate, and mental health organizer in Thunder Bay, Ontario. That's about all the time we have this week on Madness Radio. Thanks a lot for tuning in. You've been listening to Madness Radio, Voices and Visions from Outside Mental Health. Madness Radio is broadcast every Wednesday, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Pacifica affiliate WXOJ-LP-FM 103.3 Valley Free Radio in Northampton, Massachusetts. For our live internet stream, podcasting, show archives, and more, visit madnessradio.net. Madness Radio is co-produced by Freedom Center and the Icarus Project. For more information, check out freedom-center.org and theicarusproject.net. For more mental health radio, listen to the News Hour from mindfreedom.org, Wednesdays, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you have an idea for a story or guest on Madness Radio, or you just want to share what's in your head, contact us at radio@madnessradio.net.
KWMD Kasilov, 90.7, Anchorage 104.5.